Of the planet. Today, I'm so thrilled to have with us Shauna Edberg, who is the Director of Conservation Programs at the Hispanic Access Foundation. So, Shauna, thank you so much for taking a moment to talk with us. You have a big week that you're involved in right now.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So, this week is Latino Conservation Week. Can you walk us through a little bit more about what that means and some of the things that you're involved in this week?
Yeah, Latino Conservation Week was created in 2014 to support the Latino community getting out to the outdoors and participating in activities to protect our air, water, land, ocean, and climate, all of it. During this week, a whole host of partners, including nonprofits, faith-based communities, government agencies, hold events throughout the country, such as hiking, camping, even things like barbecues, film screenings, musical concerts. And of course, last year we had to add a variety of virtual and at-home conservation events to promote conservation efforts in Latino communities and also provide Latinos an opportunity to show their support to permanently protect our environment. Latino Conservation Week began with just 9 events 7 years ago, and this year we're on track to have close to 200 or maybe more.
That's awesome. And, I think that kind of gets into the broader issue that often Latinos have been unrecognized for their contributions to conservation. So I wanted to ask, what are some of the unique ways that Latinos are involved in conservation?
Nature is deeply connected to Latino culture and history, but the community has not been traditionally recognized for its appreciation and love of the outdoors and the environment. And Latinos also, because of socioeconomic conditions in this country, Latinos face a lot of barriers to getting to public spaces like parks and beaches and getting involved in the environmental community. So that's our job to change that at Hispanic Access. And we do that in a variety of ways, from helping Latinos get employed and get internships in conservation agencies and government. We host things like Latino Conservation Week to show how much support there is in the Latino community for environmental protection. And we help to boost Latino voices in policy and government decision making. So we try to provide those bridges of access so that Latinos can get their seat at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that seat at the table, I think some of the more recent polling data we have shows that 86% of Latinos support conservation of resources like water. They're deeply concerned about climate change, but they don't often have a seat at the table where decisions about addressing some of these issues are made. So on a leadership level, how can we begin to change that?
That's another thing that we try to do, is to get Latinos in the room when decisions are made and have their voices heard. One way to do that is by partnering with your local Latino groups, nonprofits. Church leadership is really important, and just elevate their voices when you can. Support Latino advocacy efforts, create a Latino Conservation Week event to facilitate the community getting out to the outdoors, or also to show support for these efforts.
And then to talk a little more broadly here, how can the environmental community begin to do better outreach to the Latino community, as they're really an undertapped environmental constituency?
Yes, there definitely is. And I would say that the environmental community needs to do better in a lot of ways. And one of those ways is to hire Latinos and other BIPOC communities to make sure you're providing pipelines to leadership so that, Latinos can really lead and show their support and passion for these issues. Again, community engagement with things like Latino Conservation Week, and recognizing that Latinos experience the outdoors in different ways than, say, like your typical image of, a white man kind of backpacking alone in the wilderness. Latinos like to go out with families, for example, to have music and food at their events. And our public spaces aren't always created to facilitate this kind of access. And so it's important to recognize that different communities use the outdoors in different ways. And then on the advocacy end, it's also important to recognize how environmental issues intersect with Latino communities. So, for example, Latinos are much more vulnerable to climate emergencies like wildfires. And so taking a look at those specific vulnerabilities that Latinos face, for example, in not hearing emergency information, in being afraid to access government services that are provided in case of emergency because of difficult relationships with police and with Border Patrol, for example, can make it a hostile environment for Latinos to access government services. Lower Latino health health insurance rates, of course, make it more difficult for Latinos to recover after an emergency or even exacerbated pollution that can affect Latino public health. Recognizing that it's not just about conservation and the environment itself, but all these different like intersections into the social issues where Latinos are more vulnerable and where their needs and their voices need to be heard.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to follow up on that and ask, is there kind of also a language barrier? I know you're talking about in the aftermath of emergency situations. So would it help when environmental groups are doing outreach to get information out, to have that information also available in Spanish and other languages?
Yes, and not just language, but also recognize kind of where your message is getting out. For example, Spanish radio is a really good way to get information out to Latino communities if they don't have great connection to the internet. And also, of course, recognizing that the Latino community is itself diverse and not all Latinos' primary language is Spanish. Many of them speak indigenous languages and are not as fluent in Spanish, let alone English. And of course, there are deaf Latinos and blind Latinos with their own access needs. So kind of every piece of this diversity needs to be considered.
And so the last question I have for you is, can you tell us some of the things that the Hispanic Access Foundation is up to or has in the works? And how can we, the broader environmental community, help support some of your goals?
Our overall mission is to connect Latinos with partners and opportunities to improve lives and create an equitable society. So, like I said, we're building those bridges so that Latinos can be leaders in every aspect of life. And so that includes promoting Latino employment, like I said, in conservation agencies, but also in other organizations. That includes working with Latino faith leaders and faith communities to ensure that these leaders can serve their community needs and gain more skills and confidence and ability to provide for their communities. And of course, all that we do in conservation to promote Latino leadership in conservation advocacy, decision making, and just in getting out and enjoying all that nature and the outdoors has to offer. There's really a need for trust building in the environmental community with BIPOC communities, and a need for environmental organizations to take a step back and listen and not necessarily rush into their own priorities without making sure that there is proper engagement with Latinos and BIPOC communities and making sure that their needs are heard. For example, there's a lot of ways that environmental policy can unintentionally negatively impact Latino communities. One example of that is green gentrification. For example, if you build a park in a low-income area, then it's possible that the residents there may get displaced because of rising property values, for example. So making sure that the local community is involved in these decisions, that they're aware of all the repercussions. So it's all about listening to the community and making sure that they are centered in these conversations and that their voices are heard.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, Shauna, I will provide some links down below because I know Latino Conservation Week is not over yet. So if folks want to get involved and if they want to host an event or be part of next year's events, they can do that as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. This has been really wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.